I thank you, General Yao, because that was a very honest assessment on your side, how you look, at the developments. And I think your conclusion, as Kishore has pointed out, that we still can do it together, I think is very encouraging. Now let me open the floor for discussions, and can you identify yourself? And also maybe if you have a question to one of the panelists, can you mention that? Over there, please.
My name is Aminul Karim. I'm a retired soldier, actually. At the moment, I'm teaching in a university in Malaysia. I have the first question to the first speaker. Sir, I couldn't follow your name, but then you are replacing Mr. Armitage, who wanted to, probably, there was a rumor that he wanted to bomb Pakistan and take it to the Stone Age, and the President Bush had to come to his defense to, take him out from that kind of stigma. My question is, you said China has the capacity and not the intent. And in military terminology, we call it, put together, we call it deterrence. So China is lacking the deterrence. If you are meaning such, as you said, that China has the capacity, the military capacity, but not the intent to use this force anywhere. Does it necessarily mean that America is going to prune down its very mighty Pacific Command, the mightiest, I would say, at this point in time in the Pacific area, a lot of aircraft carriers and the Marine Corps and Japan alliance and the South Korean alliance and so on and so forth. So would I take it that you are going to prune down your forces in the Pacific region? And my second question is to Mr. Kishore Mahbubani. Sir,
can you use your microphone, please?
Yeah. You talked about the tensions, and I fully agree to those. The tensions between India and China, which is real, about the border demarcation and other problems, especially in the Arunachal Pradesh and in Kashmir. The tensions between China and Japan, which is real, again, the Dayatollah Islands and East Asia Sea and so on and so forth. And Japan is also rearming and, going for military modernization. It is spending about $50 billion per year. You also talked about the other tensions in Asia, like North Korea, South Korea, the problem in South Korea and Japan, the South China Sea, Malacca Strait, and so on and so forth. These are the real problems. But then again, you are saying you are very optimistic about the next few decades. Now, if something goes wrong any time, it will be very difficult to contain these tensions. So are you not contradicting between what your futuristic scenario is, given the tensions that are available in the region? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Kishore, you like to take it up first? Or you first?
Sure.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Well, thank you. As far as intent goes, it would be helpful if the Chinese military was a little more transparent. Transparency isn't a hallmark of the Chinese system, as you all know. So, there's some question, and then things change. Stuff happens, as they say, in this complicated world. So, the problem might not be China. It could be anywhere. But the United States has a lot of security commitments in the Asia Pacific, and so I can assure you, the United States military, we're a Pacific power. We're here to stay, and we won't be pulling back.
Kishore?
You're absolutely right. There is a tension between my description of the various tensions in the Asia-Pacific region and my optimism for the future. And the reason why I'm optimistic despite these tensions is because I have actually seen how these tensions have been managed over the past decade. I mean, take, for example, China and India. What's interesting is that the Chinese and Indians, I believe, somewhere around the year 2000, set a target of hitting $10 billion trade, by 2010. They achieved it in 2 or 3 years. They again set the target of reaching 20 billion in 2010. Again, they achieved it in a few years. They kept raising their targets and kept meeting it every few years. Today is somewhere like $50 or $60 billion in trade. And what's interesting is that despite all the difficulties in the bilateral relationship, both sides have been trying very carefully to ensure that they solve the problems. I mean, you mentioned that the border problems, but as you know, at the border, if I'm not mistaken, they have an agreement that to avoid incidents, the Chinese patrol on Monday, the Indians patrol on Tuesday, the Chinese patrol on Wednesday, Indians patrol Thursday, and that's how you avoid incidents. Similarly, when they had a problem about some Indian being given a visa on a piece of paper, which upset the Indians, they canceled a trip to China and so on and so forth. Wan Jiabao, I don't know when, went to New Delhi, and then some weeks later, the pieces of paper disappeared from the passport. I mean, these are ways, they sort of, you know, they had problems, but they quietly found ways and means of dealing with it. So I'm not denying that the tensions are there, and the tensions will be there, the suspicions will be there. In today's Straits Times, I haven't read the article, but there's a long article about how Myanmar will become now a center of rivalry between India and China. That's natural. That's inevitable. I mean, I tell you, 1976, okay? Now, this takes us back how many years? 35 years, right? I'll tell you a true story. I was at a non-aligned meeting, and there was this big debate, this non-aligned meeting within the Southeast Asian group and South Asian group about where Myanmar, Burma belong in the region. So Southeast Asia said, of course, you know, Burma is part of Southeast Asia. So the Indian foreign minister insisted that Burma was part of South Asia. So finally we asked the Burmese foreign minister who was in the room. So the Burmese foreign minister said, I think we are in Southeast Asia. And the Indian foreign minister replied, you don't know. Burma is part of South Asia. So, I mean, that was a very interesting anecdote. It's a true story. So it captures to you the fact that there will always be these tensions. Similarly, between China and Japan, I think the Chinese now realize that the biggest mistake they can make is to alienate Japan. Because frankly, the #1 security nightmare for China is not difficult to imagine, which is that Japan goes nuclear. And Japan can go nuclear. Some people say 1 year, I say 3 weeks. So it is not in China's interest to push Japan into a corner. And that's why you notice that in the previously, when Wan Jiabao went to Tokyo, he said he wrote every line of his speech himself. When a prime minister writes every line of a speech himself, he knows the stakes involved in that relationship. So I believe, so my response to you is yes, these tensions will always be there. The question is how you manage them. And I would say that decade by decade, the capacity to manage this is improving.
Thank you. Prime Minister Howard, please, here in the front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an observation. The Professor will respond if he wishes. I may have got the mistaken impression from your comment that nations like Australia had to choose between their past and their present. I challenge that. I used to say very frequently when I was Prime Minister of Australia that no country should choose between her history and her geography. And you were quite right. Australia is culturally very much a Western country, and it should remain so because that's who we are. But I spent most of my Prime Ministership working very hard at avoiding that choice. I think it's fair to say that at the end of my Prime Ministership, our already close relationship with the United States was even more intimate than it had been when I started. And I think it's also fair to say that at the end of my Prime Ministership, we'd seen an absolute transformation in our relationship with China. In fact, our exports to China, and I owe this to Providence, not to diplomacy, our exports to China had quadrupled And we were able to point to a very pragmatic, valuable relationship with China, but one based on an acceptance that we were politically and culturally very different countries, but that didn't stop us getting on well together. And I guess the only observation I'd make is that in this globalised world in which we live, we shouldn't suggest that countries have got to choose. I think what you can do is be faithful to your history, but also be realistic about your geography. And that's certainly a bit of advice I'd continue to give to leaders of my country.
Well, Kishore, you'd like to answer that?
Yeah. I was actually aware that Prime Minister Howard was in the room when I made that statement very cautiously, and I don't disagree. And I don't disagree with the facts that Prime Minister Howard has given. Actually, I think, frankly, Australia's positive contributions to the security picture in Asia Pacific are, I think, underestimated. I think Australia overall plays a very positive role. Australia has played the lead role, as you know, in launching APEC in the early years, and APEC has grown with a lot of Australian help. So I think Australia overall has played a very positive role in the region, I agree. But I do think that if you come down the road 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, it is inevitable that there will be, I don't know what the issue will be. There'll be some issue. Let me give you a concrete example, okay? You know, when Japan ran for permanent membership of the UN Security Council, Japan assumed that the 10 ASEAN countries to which Japan had given a lot of aid to would support Japan because ASEANs were friends of Japan. But as you know, China was not happy about Japan's candidature, so a tussle began diplomatically in Southeast Asia between Japan and China. And at the end of the day, I'm not giving a secret away, out of 10 ASEAN nations, 1, Singapore, supported Japan publicly, 1, Vietnam, supported Japan privately, the other 8 said nothing. Now that's an indication of power shifts. Countries have to make choices. And my prediction is that I don't know what the issue will be, I don't know how it will surface, but there will be choices that countries have to make. And I think only then will we know which directions go in. But I mean, by the way, I do believe that Australia can play a positive role in the region, and I believe we should encourage Australia to play a positive role in the region, but I'm anticipating that there will be challenges.
Well, I think I can testify on that, because I was very disturbed, to be frank, when you were elected Prime Minister for the first time as an Indonesian. But at the end, I have to congratulate you how much you have done between Australia and Southeast Asia particularly. So thank you for that. Now let me open the floor there.
I presume Kishore will be the first to accept that size is not everything. Singapore has a population of 0.06% of the world's population and clearly punches above its weight. So I'm curious if you can expand a bit more on the list of statistics you gave about China that are all very impressive. Maybe it's worth recalling that the United States of America rose to world supremacy with a population of just 90 million, not many of whom had PhDs at all. And in that regard, what truly makes a world power isn't merely economic clout, but the new values, philosophies, and ideas that they bring to the market. In America's case, it was the land of the free market, free conscience, and freedom of expression. So maybe Kishore and Major General Yao, could you tell me what new ideas and values China is going to bring in order to ascend to its presumed position of world leadership?
Well, yes, why not, Kishore?
Yeah.
And then,
I must thank you very much for asking such a sharp question, because I like to give sharp responses. And I would say your question reflects the kind of wishful thinking that many people have in the West, that what you see in the rise of Asia is just a temporary bad dream, a nightmare that will disappear. And we will go back to the good old days where the top powers in the world will always be Western. Now that's a wishful dream. Because I can tell you, it's funny, you ask a sharp question, let me give you a sharp response. Don't be afraid of it. If you look back over the last 2,000 years, how did the world survive without the United States of America? Were the civilizations of China and India essentially intolerant, uncivilized places? Or did they lead the world in providing values that the rest of the world learned from? And let me just recommend to you one book to read. It's by Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner. It's called The Argumentative Indian. Good title. And you will find in it essays where he tries to document for the Western reader how many of the values that the West claims to be its own, whether it's tolerance, whether it's freedom, came back from much more ancient days from Asia. So don't assume that just because we don't have the rhetoric of freedom, that we don't have values of our own. And don't assume that civilizations like China and India have no inherent values of their own, because they do. And believe me, I think they can also inspire the rest of the world.
General Yao, would you like to participate? Yeah, please. And then Sergei.
I agree with your idea that economy cannot count as the most important element in the great power status. China has been successful in mostly in economic fields, but China has also, I think China begins to projecting its values, its systems, and its culture as a whole, as can be illustrated by the debate of a Beijing consensus vis-à-vis the Washington consensus. The international CIS community so far has been dominated by the Western-style values, social systems, democracies, market economies, and social values. These are very successful and admirable things, and from which China has learned and will continue to learn. However, a simple transplant of all things Western to other cultures, to other societies, especially societies like China's and Indians, who has also inherited 5,000 years of its own tradition, will be very difficult. And China's philosophy of harmony and China's philosophy of collectivism, China's philosophy of taking and giving, and I think China so far has not been very good at articulating its values, at organizing its ethics. But China is doing that so that China can have a more comprehensive way, a more comprehensive way of success, and China can rise not only as a second largest economy, but also as the most attractive, appealing, or more attractive and appealing society. But China has a long way to go. China is learning from all kinds of diversified values and cultures and ways of government. And the best thing for China now is it's open, and it's open-minded. It keeps its tradition at the same time. It learns. It is open to all kinds of choices and options, and that's the very important thing for China to continue to rise.
Sergei, you would like to participate in the debate?
I would like to add two things to the debate. One is the main thing is not exactly the figure, but the main issue is the vector of development. Everybody believes that China is on the rise, and that adds up, I mean, a lot. I mean, it quadruples China's power. As simple as that. While everybody believes that because of their mistakes done in the previous decades, that especially during the previous decade, the United States is on a downward spiral, in spite of the fact that the United States is obviously a vibrant society, a powerful country, and a very strong economy. But it goes down in the eyes of the world, and that is the main thing. And until the United States proves that it could reverse its policies, it will be the case. The United States is down, China is up. The second issue is that my own country should only opt for democracy. I mean, we could not copy the Asian way, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, I don't know. I mean, but the thing is that there is an Asian way. And of course, we could criticize China for being, communist, or China for being authoritarian, etc., etc. But there is Singapore, and Singapore is the most developed society in the world, and it has been non-democratic. I mean, by Western criteria, and it has proven to be a fantastic success story. And the fact that Singapore hits beyond its weight, also due to the fact that it's not an exception anymore, because China has joined the same way.
Okay, thank you, Sergei. In the middle here, maybe in the back there first. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the panel.
Can you identify yourself?
My name is Francisco Tatad, former Senator of the Philippines. Whether or not China's rise as a global power and America's going the other way are inevitable. The shift of power from the West to the East and from the hands of traditional state actors to non-actors seem to be undeniable. And also, while the major players continue to compete for military superiority, if not dominance, they all seem to be giving increasing attention and emphasis to the use of soft power. Now, all this allows us to ask questions and to speculate on the kind of security, environment, and architecture that would change the relationship between and among the major players. But as a citizen of a small, developing country, I am more interested in hearing from the experts what the small countries of the region, especially those involved in a very serious maritime territorial dispute, can possibly expect from the new emerging security environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you would like to say something about that? And then, yeah. You also, maybe, yeah. Okay.
Because you mentioned of South China Sea, I would like to express only my personal views. China has unsettled disputes over the islands and reefs and related maritime interest in South China Sea. It has existed for some time. It's not new. And China's position on how to solve these issues has been very consistent. That is to negotiate, to solve them through peaceful and political means. But before, because it's so complicated and the claims are sometimes overlapping, and China prefers to do it in bilateral frameworks so that to make it maybe a little bit easier, but still it's very complicated. It's not easy to solve. Before the issues can be solved, can be settled, China prefers to shelve them, to put them aside, not to talk about them, not to make it, to flare up the issues, and then to cooperate with the relevant countries to develop the resources in related islands and reefs and surrounding waters. So China does have such unsolved problems. That's the problem between China and some ASEAN countries. China has also problems in South China Sea with the United States. That's another issue. That is the constant air and maritime surveillance and monitoring activities conducted against China. It has been going on and it has been increased in recent years. It is caused, and the disputes are caused by different interpretations of the UNCLOS, the UN law of a Convention of Laws of Seas, and so that's the issue between China and the United States. They have to solve this issue between the two, between themselves. And the third issue is the so-called freedom of navigation in South China Sea. I think this is a fake issue. It's a false issue. It doesn't exist because freedom of navigation has not been disrupted, challenged in South China Sea. And freedom of navigation is in the interest of China, in the interest of the United States, and in the interest of all ASEAN countries, of Japan, of ROK, of Australia, of whatever country you can think in East Asia. So this freedom of navigation should be an issue to cooperate for cooperation of all parties concerned. But the problem is we shouldn't confuse hostile reconnaissance and surveillance activities with freedom of navigation. We shouldn't confuse the territorial disputes between China and ASEAN countries with this kind of activities, surveillance activities between China and the United States. In this way, I think things can be settled more easily.
Sure. Well, first of all, regardless of the size of a nation, it certainly should have a voice in the new regional security architecture. Nobody should be ignored. That's that's number one. Number two, with respect to the South China Sea and the U.S.'s activities there, the U.S. has guaranteed for many years the security and peacefulness of this Pacific region, in fact, which enabled it to grow. And we have huge the U.S. has huge economic interests in the Pacific as well as allies, so it's not unnatural we should have an interest there. And with regard to the specific issue, it's our position that because there are multiple claimants, for instance, I think there are 4 or 5 claimants for the Spratlys, that really this can't be settled bilaterally. It's really multilateral. You have Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, China, numerous claimants, and so it makes sense to have a multilateral forum to settle the issue. But we certainly agree that the key is that any issue there be settled peacefully and through discussions. Nobody wants to see tensions rising in the South Pacific.
Thank you. Sergei, you have a...
Yes, I have one comment which is somewhat related to the question, which questions the question. The Center for Philippines have said that non-state actors are on the rise, the states are out, etc., etc. I think it's one thing we should change. We should start to change in our minds is we should do away with somewhat of the old thinking. States are again on the rise, and maybe they have never been in decline. Let me remind me, when I was a kid, 30 years ago, everybody was stealth. 40 years ago, everybody was telling that transnational corporations will take over the world. And where are these transnational corporations? They help us, of course, to build this prosperity. But do they rule the world? NGOs, where are these NGOs? Al-Qaeda is a myth. Other NGOs are, well, some of them help some of our governments, some of them help some groups of the governments, but other than that, they are not a force. And let me remind you that, I mean, there were NGOs in the previous ages which were indefinitely stronger than the NGOs we ever think about. The Christian Church, the Pope, that was an NGO, I would say, which was ruling half of the world. The communist movement, Comintern, I mean, that was an NGO which was running half of the world, by the way. And in the meantime, we have been telling each other for quite some time that the states are out. The states are here. They will have to stay. Of course, their globalization processes, informational processes, economic processes are making them somewhat weaker, but in some cases they make them stronger. The question is how to use this world to the betterment of the whole humanity, including the states. The states should be used constructively rather than discarded.
Thank you. Well, over there, I think here first and then in the back, okay?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm Professor Ken Morgan from the University of Western Australia. If we're looking at the title, Shifting Balance of Power in the 21st Century, and we've had a number of discussions here regarding what Ambassador Mahbubani says his silent hero being ASEAN. If each one of you, including the moderator, was sitting in Hanoi last year when the president of Vietnam announced at the conclusion of the leaders' meeting regarding no longer ASEAN plus 3, but basically an ASEAN plus 8, including Russia and the United States being engaged in ASEAN. So would each one of you share with us, if you had to write a cable back to your leaders after that meeting in Hanoi, what would you say to your leader, your prime minister, your president, about the impact of moving towards an ASEAN +8 relationship as it comes down to the burden sharing or the prevention of tensions within the region?
Well, thank you. We're very short. Kishore, would you like to start?
I would send back a very positive cable saying that all this shows once again the centrality of the ASEAN process in the Asia-Pacific region, that if you're looking for some kind of vehicle to promote cooperation on economic and also security areas, ASEAN again provided the location for doing so. And you couldn't have done it in Japan, you couldn't have done it in China, you couldn't have done it in India. It had to be centered in ASEAN.
Thank you. Sergei.
Well, actually, I wrote an article exactly along the Kishore lines. I said that, ASEAN is an excellent example which should be widened to the whole Asian Pacific community. Of course, unfortunately, Singapore couldn't rule the world as of yet. But in principle, ASEAN provides us with an excellent example of interstate cooperation, which have resulted in increased cooperation on economic, social, cultural, but also, and very importantly, decreased tension between countries which have inherited these tensions from the past. And the question now is how to create kind of an ASEAN plus every Pacific nation.
Michelle?
I think ASEAN process has been very, very successful and constructive to regional peace and stability, and China is very supportive of all platforms, forums that ASEAN has created so far, and ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3, and ASEAN +8, all these are useful, constructive, appealing forums, platforms for discussions, for exchange of ideas. And I hope this kind of discussions and exchange of ideas can develop into something more substantial in policy.
Thank you. Mr. Randt, you have something to say?
Sure. On my cable, I'd be careful about what I said because you'd read about it in WikiLeaks, shortly. So nothing incendiary, but no, I would. If the administration didn't know it, I'd remind him how important this part of the world is. It's obvious. I hope I would hardly need to remind those in Washington what an important part of the world this is, and that this is a great opportunity, and I would encourage the President of the United States to attend.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think that we have to develop, this ASEAN +8 or EAS, East Asian Summit, into a more concept of power in the future to prevent this antagonism, possible antagonism, and potential tensions to be alleviated. So that maybe is the first step. I promised the general there, sorry, general, and then Shashi, sorry, this are the last two we can afford because we are waiting for lunch. I will be killed by you all if I postpone it for too long. Okay, general.
Ambassador Mahbubani, one among many of us in Asia who have followed your writings over the years and been impressed by your reflection on global developments and futures from an Asian perspective. May I ask you two specific questions? A small one on the question of Myanmar. Myanmar has also recently asked for a membership of SARC. Now, is it possible for Myanmar to be a member of both ASEAN and SARC? If it were to be possible, it would be perhaps remove at one stretch one of the, as you mentioned, possible conflict zones between India and China. It could instead become perhaps a bridge between South Asia and ASEAN. Is that possible, feasible? The second and larger question, you mentioned about 2010 being a bad year for Chinese foreign policy. I would also see it as the end of the 2-decade-old Deng Xiaoping's dictum of keeping your head down. It was, in a sense, an emergence of China. The Olympics, the World Expo, and the 1st October 2009 parade reflected a whole range of such developments. So, in respect of tensions in the global transition, internal tensions within Asia, is this just an exception, or is this assertion within China in terms of its foreign policy a trend that we like to see more of as a new generation of leaders now transit to positions of power in China? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as I can because I think we are beyond time. Right. Very quickly on Myanmar. By the way, I must say I learned something new. I wasn't aware that Myanmar had applied for membership in SAARC. How it will play out, I'm not quite sure. But on overall, by the way, I'm actually somebody who believes that the Myanmar problem will be solved slowly and carefully. Because, I mean, I'm actually astonished, by the way. I thought the last elections in Myanmar were a fraud. To my absolute surprise, something seems to be changing positively. The parliament seems to be passing laws that the military is not happy with. Aung San Suu Kyi has suddenly got a lot more political space. So some kind of positive developments are happening in Myanmar. And I suggest that these positive developments are, at the end of the day, a demonstration that the policies of engagement that ASEAN, India, and China all have had with Myanmar have worked, and the Western policy of isolating Myanmar has not worked. Okay, so my first answer on Myanmar. Your second question about China and Deng Xiaoping's advice about keeping a low profile, and you're right, I mean, the assertive actions of the 2010 seem to suggest that the low profile posture seemed to have gone away. But my understanding is that the Chinese seem to be aware that they made lots of mistakes in 2010, and they're trying to learn from the mistakes. And I would not be surprised when the Chinese Politburo meet or when the Chinese leadership meet, there must be some ferocious debates going on within the Chinese leadership about what is the right policy to take, because you can make a very strong argument that yes, let's carry on for another 10 to 20 years of Deng Xiaoping's low profile, and you can make a very strong case for that. But I can also imagine other younger Chinese saying, this is not normal. Come on, we're now the second largest economy in the world. Every major country in the world asserts its policies. Why shouldn't China assert its policies? Why should China be abnormal? So there must be a very strong point of view within the Chinese leadership saying the time has come for China to behave like a normal country, and a normal country with the second largest economy in the world is normally assertive. So how the debate will play out, I don't know, but I hope that the Chinese continue to heed Deng Xiaoping's advice and keep a low profile for another 10 to 20 years.
Last but not least, Shashi, and then we have to end, because we are 5 minutes when we started late, by 5 minutes, you know, I can also have 2 more minutes for you, Shashi.
I'll be very brief. You know, it's one of the wry observations people have at gatherings like this, that the Indians always talk about China and the Chinese never mention India. I listened very attentively to General Yao, and I didn't hear the word India escape her lips. So just a brief question. How do you see, what are your main concerns about the India-China relationship, and how do you see them evolving in the proximate future?
I'm sorry I didn't mention the great India. Actually, in my original speech, I did. In my original version, because I have to shorten it, and India was unfortunately deleted from my presentation. India-China relation is on fairly good shape. Actually, I think that there are discussions. China has concerns, anxieties when India reached out to the United States and when there are some improvement of relations. But historically, even though China and India had fought a war in 1962, I think the feeling among the Chinese people are generally friendly toward the Indians. The India as a country and the Indians as a people, because India had been one of the earliest countries to recognize China, and India had supported consistently, even after the war, UN membership for China, and India had been the leader of the alignment movement, of which China is a firm supporter. And I think China always look at Indians as a very friendly and a partner, at least, a co-developing country. And China really hopes that India can develop as fast as China. And I think that the general mentality in China is that we have enough room. We have enough room for both China and India to rise at the same time. And there is no need for us to compete. And there is even less possibility for the two to fight another war about border disputes. So I think India is more and more frequently mentioned in Chinese newspapers, mediums, and in Chinese university classrooms, in scholars' discussions, in seminars, forums, workshops. India is actually rising in China.
Thank you. Well, let us give a big hand to the panelists. Thank you. I think the meeting is adjourned, but I have to give to the protocol, the last word to guide us where to go.
Just a thank you to Mr. Wanandi and all four panelists for your invaluable insights. Ladies and gentlemen, we at this juncture would like to invite you to lunch at the Island Ballroom. The next panel will begin at 2:15. Please bring your belongings with you as the ballroom here will be refreshed. Thank you.